So yes, as Mark said, it's a roundtable discussion on Android's bright future. And so I'm just going to introduce the panelists again. We have Tony Palazzo. He's the Director of Handset Procurement and Logistics at Mobilicity. Ken Price, Director of Marketing for Mobile Communications Division at Samsung Electronics Canada. And Marc Salzman, he's a freelance journalist and broadcast technology expert. So things are looking great for Android. Android's market share is dominating the smartphone market. But what does the future hold for Android? 2 years ago, the Android operating system was pretty basic. Adding a user interface like Samsung TouchWiz on top of Android made a lot of sense. While it still makes sense, Android has added a lot of features. More importantly, its design is more elegant, and it's more functional. Will third-party UIs become redundant in the future? We'll start with Tony.
Thanks, Howard. What I can tell you is from our customer base, if you compare the two types of customers, so customers that are more avid Android users, what we find with our customers, they tend to enjoy more of a vanilla version Android. They like to customize. They're very confident in what they can do with the Android platform, with the apps that are there to their likings. We have a lot of novice consumers that would just entering in the smartphone category. Those type of consumers, they prefer having user interface from certain OEMs that overlay on top of the vanilla version, and that just makes the ease of access for them to find a lot of the cool features that are on the Android platform. And we find a really cross between both of those in our customer base.
Ken?
Sure. I think I'd like to add on to that. I mean, it's an interesting, the first question, is there a bright future for Android? I mean, absolutely. I think that wasn't a certain answer a few years ago, right? It was like the great experiment. I mean, the way that Google is managing Android and the way that it's been given a lot of freedom to OEMs, that was a big risk, I think, that they took, but I think it's paid off for a big part of the mobile community who was looking for something that was more customizable, adaptable, both from a manufacturer's point of view and a consumer's point of view. So I think that's definitely paid off, there's no question. I think that, the turning point, I think for me, was somewhere around Eclair, going to Froyo, we like the dessert names or whatever, somewhere around 2.1 is where it started to explode. I think we also had the right devices to drive that appeal. And then it started to become easy enough to use that we got past that very early part of the early adopter segment and started to bring products that more the majority of customers can use. But I would say that even as we're a couple of years past that and we're on 4.0 to going to 4.1, that we're still at a point where Android probably isn't in its native form as easy to use as it could be. And I think there's some really deeply integrated features, and Google's done a good job in that piece, but I think collectively there's still some ease of use. So if you talk about opportunities for growth, it's certainly beyond the tech enthusiast and those that who buy technology for fashion to move into a more mainstream. And I'd say the other part that I'll say as part of my opening is that there's probably two areas that I think are obvious, and I think you'll see a lot of progression in the next year and a half. One is related to the professional market and the business decision maker, who clearly is deciding what to do with respect to multiple OSs and starts to see Android and very clearly as an alternative to what they had been purchasing. And frankly, I think the price points, productivity, and the power of the devices are starting to drive an ROI case for even more mobile adoption. And the second thing I think you'll see beyond business adoption and professional and for Android will be around other devices, complementary devices. We still really haven't figured out the mass market tablet version of Android, but there certainly is one to be made in that regard. There's clearly a tablet market for a certain design and reference who needs no help from me advertising, so I won't. But then there's other ideas about what might complement the Android experience beyond the phone. So I think those two areas, and I think you'll see a lot of things happen in the next 12 months that will play that out.
I'll just add a little bit here. I can understand from a handset maker such as Samsung, you want to differentiate your Android lineup from the competition, not just from a hardware perspective, but by adding your own spin, your own software overlay on top that enhances the experience. But of course, it has to be in order to enhance the experience and not complicated. And I would agree with you. I will mirror Ken's sentiment that compared to competing platforms, including iOS, I don't think Android is as easy to use for non-techie folks. So the more tools and UI tweaks that companies like Samsung can make to enhance and enrich the experience or simplify the experience, the better. Because I still think Android has some room to grow in that respect when it comes to ease of use. And I think certainly in the business community, I think we'll be talking about this soon, Howard, about the adoption of business, and there's some other concerns there, but certainly have a uniform experience is important.
So Google has been accelerating the pace at which they release new versions of Android. Since last year, we've gone from gingerbread to honeycomb to ice cream sandwich, and now we have jelly bean, Android 4.1. So do you think this rapid release schedule is a good or bad for the ecosystem? Ken?
Well, it's been challenging. I mean, certainly, and civil. So, yes, it's been challenging because I think, so Samsung. I liked your first chart actually because it showed Android way up and to the right, and that's obviously the market that we participate in. So, with all our shortcomings, I think we can also acknowledge that there's been broad adoption, and while that gap between where Android is and the next one isn't as big, it's still the leading operating system sold in Canada for mobile devices. So by many sources. So that's a statement, but it hasn't been challenging. Sure, I think because especially the early adopters that we lured in are very passionate. So I think one thing we've learned through social media, and sort of the growth of social media marketing in particular, is that the Android community is very outspoken, and it will tell you when you're not sort of keeping pace, and their expectation is that you will keep pace. But I think that it was important that Android moved things quickly because they were kind of coming from nowhere to this point. And now with the harmonization, of around 4.0 as a reference for both tablets and phones, I think you'll see this sort of space out a little bit. So I would defend what's happened, even though I think it's caused a little bit of confusion and also challenges for OEMs to try to serve this up and to properly qualify it and to make sure the products that we deliver are of the highest quality, working with our partners. That's an investment that we needed to make, but I think it's been necessary to this point to get to where we are. I'm not sure it's going to continue the same way that it has.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
If I can just add to that as well, to Ken's point. From a consumer standpoint, people like change, obviously. Additions and improvements to the software, right? So to Ken's point, they're very fluent customers in explaining what they like about Android, what they don't, what changes they want. And I think Google's done a great job in adding a lot of changes and developments and improvements to the software. The challenge, though, is that there's probably 50% still on some old iterations of Android now. Consumers hear about the latest and greatest and versions, and they keep seeing all these upgrades, and we get a lot of customers all the time calling us and saying, when are you getting your upgrade? When are you getting your upgrade? So, so it tends to put challenges on OEM partners, like Samsung, as well as on ourselves too, in customers wanting the latest and greatest there. So not knowing that what they have may have what they need. So I think it's just a challenge, and when they see many versions of that Android software coming out very frequently, it can pose some challenges on there with it, and those are challenges that carriers face as well as OEM partners face as well that we have to deal with.
Tony and Ken, maybe you can clarify on that note, because I get this. If my email is any indication, people are frustrated with the updates for Android. Is it rolled out from the carrier level? Is it rolled out on the handset maker level, such as a Samsung? Or is it a Google thing, and they call the shots, and they say which phones can be updated to what version of what, to go to Jelly Bean, for example? Who makes the call, and why can't many Canadian consumers update their Android to be the latest?
Well, I think there's two different models. The one thing is, so first of all, there are no free operating systems in the world. I'm sure many people in the room will understand that, what I'm saying. This is supposed to be free, but it's not free to anybody, right? So you have one model, which is the Microsoft, this PC reference model, which is really what Microsoft and Apple came out of PCs. So they build operating systems and charge either you or the OEM for them, and they tightly control the release schedule and so on. And there are customers that are frustrated by the pace at which those upgrades come, but they're tightly controlled, and they kind of all happen at the same time. So everybody feels, I think, like they got the upgrade at the same time. The great Google experiment was to go more Linux, which is I don't know, we'll give you like 80% of an operating system, and then you fill in the rest. So you can provide differentiation, integrate it tightly with what your idea of what a mobile phone should be, and then roll that out. So I think there's but there's this sort of false expectation that there is an Android. There are Androids, even at 4.1, and you know what? I'll say something that I'm going to get like a bazillion comments, but there is no single one, and that's intentional. That was by design. So to buy into what Android is doing is to buy in not just to Android, but to buy into the Samsung iteration of, or the HTC iteration of, or whatever, of that operating system. So I think that needs to be understood. The exception to that, of course, is Google's disruptive business model and bringing devices to market to push us along, which is I think a clever way of kind of moving the ball, right? So now Samsung's been a partner in some of that, and HTC's been a partner in some of that, right? So we brought gingerbread, and then Jelly Bean has been brought to market with a tablet, and we had two phones, kind of ice cream samples. So the 2.3 and the 4.0, right? So the 2.3 and the 4.0 came to market with products that were built by Samsung, but were more Google controlled. So you had the alternative in buying into the Nexus brand to sort of say, this is what Google wanted to deliver as a finished product. So I realize it's a little bit of but it's just unintentionally different. So I think that people get just a little bit impatient because I think they're not quite sure what the pace should be, right? And then you take it into the fact that frankly that in the handset world, I mean there are things that we need to do to make sure they work properly in our networks. Like the fact is that the networks here, the standards that the carriers have here are very high. And actually this is the part that doesn't come with all of the love letters that you see about carrier service in Canada, how much they charge. But the fact is that when you travel the world and realize we have pretty good service, but that comes with a high standard of QA that we need to meet. And frankly, before we do anything to the phone, we've got to go through that testing, which is a barrier that as an industry I think we've settled on. And maybe it causes us to be a little slower than other markets, but I think it's been one that allows us to deliver a high quality experience. So it's one that I would personally defend. But I know that can be. So first of all, you don't have a single reference on what that Android schedule should be, unlike the proprietary OSs, and then you have this high standard of quality that causes us to move cautiously.
I'm going to keep my answer probably a little shorter than Ken's there, but really we do take the lead from our OEM partners. So all the challenges that Ken just mentioned to everybody, from a carrier standpoint, I can say we do get a lot of inquiries as well as to why, when we're going to launch, why are you delaying? There might be other versions out there, but as Ken mentioned, there's a lot of QA process that we work closely with our partners on. As those become available to us, we work with them. As soon as they're made available, we've properly tested them, we make them available to our consumers. So I think Ken's got probably a lot more of the challenges to deal with on his side, but from a carrier standpoint, we gladly accept those upgrades and changes as they come to us, and we do our proper Q&A and TA on that before we make it available to our consumers.
Actually, this just to add to this question, do you think it's going to keep going at this pace? Like, do you think in the next year we're going to go from 4.1 to 4.2, 4.3, 5.0? Do you think it's going to keep going this quickly?
Personally, I don't. I think it moved this quickly because they went from nothing to something in a very short amount of time, and the iterations, they needed to be quick. I think now you have a sort of stability around what that definition is, so I don't personally think it's going to go as quickly. We don't know everything that, not everything is fully disclosed even to the OEMs, so but I'd say that we have kind of 4.1. I mean, there's kind of an indication. We did Ice Cream Sandwich this year, which was a bigger move, and it was the harmonization of the tablet and the phone OS. The 2 series and the 3 series come together. So this one's 4.1 is more iterative, I'd say, in terms of its importance or its benefit to the customers. I think we're going to see this now spread out a lot further. And I think other considerations are coming into it. We can talk about that later.
I've heard developers pushing back against Google to slow down the release schedule because they, spend their resources to develop an app, and then even then your audience is limited because if you create an app for, only Ice Cream Sandwich or Jelly Bean phones, but someone's running an older model, they can't run it. So there's not then the app developer gets the brunt of the frustration from the consumer saying, I just downloaded your app and I paid $2 for it and it won't run on my phone. So they want, from what I've heard, they want the schedule to slow down as well.
So do you think this will result in more or less new Android phones, the rapid schedule? Because one thing I've noticed is that for some OEM, like Samsung is in good shape right now. They've got good market share. They're probably making a lot of money. So you can devote the resources to spend, getting a Jelly Bean phone, like a 4.1 phone out before the other one. So like I've noticed some OEMs like Sony, who probably can't spend as much money developing their phones, they're still releasing 2.3 phones. And I mean, part of me wonders whether it's because they just can't, that this may be one of the things that separates the successful from the less successful OEMs, how much money they can spend on keeping up with Android, the latest version. Like some OEMs are still getting ready to release their ice cream sandwich updates, for example, even though 4.1 has already come to market. So
Thank you for pointing out that was somebody else. Appreciate that. No, high tech is about scale or die. I mean, you get a great idea, then you compete like crazy, and then the big dog wins, and then we all get another good idea. A bunch of people jump on, big dog wins. So I think that you expect to see the same thing as the product cycles mature and so on. I know that's going to be a question later on as well about what we think. And I think there's, in the long history of high tech, that's a pretty common repeated piece, and that's why, and customers will tell you in very unsubtle ways whether you have a good idea or not. So
I got to tell you from my point of view, who has to manage purchasing as well and inventory management, I wouldn't mind a little slowing down as well. I'm getting a little hard myself on trying to figure out the difference between some of these devices. They all look the same to me. So trying to manage inventory purchasing on that as well is a chore. So I think to Ken's point, I can see that slowing down as well in the amount of versions that the OEMs start to come out with as well, and I think that's going to have a longer span on some of these devices right now as they get more high-end to technical savvy equipped and everything for consumer needs. There's probably going to be less of a desire to want to continually launch more and more multiple devices in a single year.